someone watching your footsteps. Turn around, look at me. There is someone who really needs you.
No clickbait. Normally, it's the hunter's job to be the one lurking in the dark, supporting the team from the shadows. But supporting the team can mean a lot of things. It doesn't have to be healing. Take out a target, terrifying and debuffing the survivors before setting up the next target, then the next. They aren't enemies. They're resources to be spent, helping you and your allies. Here's the quick build. Void Warlock with Felwinter's Helm. Weapons are extremely flexible, and the only requirement is they break shields in whatever you're playing, and do enough damage to make finishers consistent. Perks don't matter, but boosting reload helps. Here's a few weapon loadouts I've used in Grandmaster Nightfalls. One for Unstop Barrier, one for Overload Barrier. Healing Rift, Burst Glide, Vortex Grenade. Aspects are Child of the Old Gods and Feed the Void. Fragments are Persistence, Starvation, Undermining, Obscurity. Here's screenshots of the armor and artifact mods you'll be using. These change with whatever weapons you'll be running. For the longer breakdown, stick around. 2 disclaimers I want to lead with. This is a budget build. It only uses Shadowkeep or free content. As a result, it will not hit as high highs as many other builds involving new content. It is still useful and a valid choice and benefits the team. If you want to see the build involving additional DLC weapons or a prismatic or choir of one, skip to here. Secondly, Void has a hard time countering champions without specializing. Suppressor grenades can feel bad against teleporting targets. Volatile rounds requires a grenade kill and a Void weapon. This build usually does not take advantage of these options. This makes it more important to swap weapons accordingly, and there are 2 main variations in the build, which I'll discuss as I get further into the video. Disclaimer over. If you already know how Felwinter's Helm works and want to get directly to the guide, go here. Alright. Felwinter's Helm hits enemies around any enemy you kill with a powered melee or finisher with a tractor cannon level debuff. This lasts longer, and the AoE is larger depending on the tier of enemy you finish, starting at 10 seconds and 15 meters, and going all the way up to 20 seconds and 25 meters. It also acts as a disorienting grenade, turning off any non-boss, non-champion within the radius for roughly 4.5 seconds. This is important to note because you'll often turn a bunch of enemies off, but you want to keep them off. So your goal with this is not to kill as many enemies as possible. Instead, it is to continue to apply this debuff on as many enemies as you can. You are an invisible monster reaching out to drag each victim into the dark. Each enemy is a resource to help you. By turning off enemies, it gives you brief windows of opportunity to attack and assists your allies. You live inside these moments between each finisher, and so you need to have the ability to determine when you finish targets. You need a weapon that does just enough damage to these targets to be easily picked off. This season, it's best to have an SMG or hand cannon. Alternatively, a weapon that will bring red bars consistently into finisher range without killing them. Your job is to set enemies up as you slowly work your way in deeper, making what your allies have to do easier. While the debuff lasts for an extended amount of time, again, the blind does not, so you need to keep finishing as opportunities emerge to do so. For this, we have 2 builds. The first one is for situations where adds spawning in are a continual threat. High pressure GMs like Liminality, Heist Battlegrounds, or Psyops, where your main priority is to keep pushing and contribute. Raid and dungeon encounters where you need to stay alive at short to medium range. You're unlikely to use this for raid boss damage unless you can get a finisher close by for the long debuff. You run Nova Warp, not because it is some secret amazing super, but because in a situation where there are a large amount of red bar enemies, it is more effective for staying alive and contributing orbs to the team. If it's not necessary for your survival, then by all means swap. But in situations where you are being attacked from all sides and don't have a finisher ready, it can save you. If champions are your priority, Swap to the Assassin version with Nova Bomb, and focus on debuffing before taking high priority targets out. This alternative build is more useful in GMs or dungeon encounters where you are more incentivized to take out individual targets rather than deal with larger groups. Because of how flexible the build is weapon-wise, I wanted to have these as example loadouts you can use for dealing with different opposition. In this one, I'm running a sword and 4th Horseman still staying in the fray, because when the build focuses heavily on finishers, it feels best when it can stay in the fray and consistently apply the debuff. Where is this build bad? If you need to sit in one place and cannot move out to engage in the loop of the build, it starts suffering. You'll still have Devour, but it wants to be doing its job to be effective. Raid or dungeon encounters where the buff effect can't be meaningfully used to hit multiple enemies. Solo dungeons where you need to kill adds quickly to maintain your health. Because it's more team support oriented, it won't have the same ability to immediately kill champions without sacrificing elsewhere or some setup. The biggest issue with the build is teammates who kill what you're trying to finish. In most situations, this isn't an issue. Even if you don't get the kill, as long as you get the finisher animation, you'll still get invis. But not the Felwinter's debuff. Unless you're trying to finish an explosive Shank or Cursed Thrall and it's shot while you're going for it. Other than this, the build tends to be resilient while there are more enemies around because you can finish them and set up for the next target while the enemies are still blinded. At its core, it's a flexible build encouraging you to be a rat. You want to be in the enemy backline, picking targets to take out. The enemies are a buffet to you. Your ally gets a champion low and you can go for a finisher. Take it. It's a free debuff for the team. You now have the time to get further into a spawn to deal with it next. This build has a simpler core gameplay loop, but it ends up feeling like a mixture between desperate and tactical because you are always on the hunt. How does it work in practice? I drop my grenade on a spawn, or start lowering a red bar's health with a primary weapon. This helps you to start up. A finisher puts you invis and marks new potential targets. From this point, you can continue to finish enemies, or go onto a higher priority target. Remember, you have a limited time window to do so before everything starts shooting you, so you have to take it out fast. A powered melee into a low target or on a full red bar into a finisher is also effective, because it will often shove it further into enemy territory, giving you a better area for the debuff. From this point, you can look for additional targets. It helps to know spawns, so you can immediately take out threats to your team. Ideally, these are red or orange bar enemies rather than full champions with the ad clear build. With the assassin-oriented one, you'll try to get the debuff on them and then go in with whatever burst weapons you're using. If you're running an eager sword, use it to get in and out. Fly in and finish or something. It's stylish as hell. A warning when using a sword or close-range weapon, it will deal a huge chunk of damage to you when you try to use it to kill Duskfield Shanks. I'm not certain if this is unique to Duskfield Shanks, a glitch, or if it just applies to larger slow effects. Look at the damage I take fighting these, I'll slow it down. You can also shadow yourself on frozen enemies. I've noticed something a little close to these issues with other swords and slow effects and liminality, but I haven't nailed it down to be as awfully consistent as this. Try to finish the Shanks when you can rather than sorting them. This is a more technically simple build. You get enemy low, you finish, you get enemy low, you finish. But in the moment-to-moment gameplay, you start seeing opportunities and ways you can better help the team. You know when this enemy is going to come out, and you're already prepared to finish it to apply a quick debuff to the champion and help reduce the enemy damage to your teammates. Or you turn off the Grims, or you stealth and take out the sniper before turning your attention back to slipping back into invisibility and debuffing enemies. You can save allies safely because you can set up a finisher to turn off chaff, invisibly res them, and then finish another enemy to refresh the blind. Pop Nova Warp to clear out red bars and orange bars. It's not great at the latter, but it gets the job done and keeps you alive. Of course, if you're running one of the Nova Bomb options, use it for boss or champion damage. What are the build objectives? You want to continually keep enemies debuffed and turned off. Is the objective to support allies by shutting down frequent enemy spawns? Focus on finishers and working your way towards more difficult targets. Is the objective to take out specific targets and assassinate champions or big targets? Get finishers, but focus on sneaking up on the champion, preferably after debuffing it. Stay alive and focus on doing your job. Be patient and leap on opportunities. This build is a lot more reliant on weapon choice than the last one, and I felt it was necessary to change these up. What I want to emphasize with this build is it fares best when it is very mobile and medium to short range. Mainly because if you're always at long range, you're just not using the exotic. And I want the builds I use to have a clear and present entertaining loop. Weapon choices I suggest will be dictated by this. Here's what you might want to consider and upgrades if you have more expansions. The build does best with a tool you can use to get enemies within finisher range reliably. Matching shields is beneficial. My priority is one weapon dealing just enough damage to feather red bars into a good finisher range, one weapon to assist with consistent or burst damage on champions or bosses, then one weapon to boost one of these goals with an emphasis on champion interaction. The weapons I've used in this are easier to come by, only requiring Onslaught, Dares, and Shadowkeep. But if you have more expansions, you're by no means restricted to this. For instance, Forerunner, Recluse, and Hammerhead is what I run in Liminality because I'm preparing to do damage to the Tormentor boss, while still remaining relevant for clearing out adds and dealing decent champion damage. I have Unstopped Barrier with this loadout. I could swap Forerunner for Izanagi's Burden and Recluse for Pointed Inquiry, as long as I'm ready to use them in a closer range bracket. I'd keep an LMG for the purpose of reliably getting enemies low for finishers in Liminality. Alternatively, in a dungeon you might not need a specific champion weapon, or you might only need one for an encounter, which would let you go more into finishers or DPS. I keep going over this because the build lacks inherent ways to deal with champions. But you could swap out your weakened grenade for volatile rounds on void weapons after a grenade kill, but this is often harder to reliably get when you need it in the moment without focusing more of the build into it. You could swap to a suppressor grenade for overloads, but it often feels unreliable to land. If you can rely on your allies for this or don't need to deal with champions, you can then swap to whatever you want or need to help the team. While you can run a prismatic good stuff build if you have Final Shape, although I can't really recommend Lightning Surge given the amount of exploding enemies and jams, it'll be more of a brawler build, where you take opportunistic finishers to get enemy shutdowns and debuffs, as opposed to having the ability to pick targets. The main alternative option I enjoyed in the past, and still do enjoy, but it has ammo and use limitations, is Heart Shadow. It pairs well with Felwinters because you have great access to invisibility, good burst, and can target backline enemies for quick kills and vanish. If you like the old and new footage you're seeing here, by all means, it is a very fun way to use the exotic and plays into the burst aspect extremely well. The main issue is not the weapon itself, but the ammo economy. The new exotic, Choir of One, is also a really good match with the current artifact mods, giving you multiple methods to bring enemies within finisher range, alongside tools to deal champion damage and resists. Here's some footage of it in action. I apologize for making this longer despite the relatively simple playstyle, but trying to make an older, unique feeling playstyle good for higher levels of play takes more weapon investment because it's less ability focused. Other potential substitutions. Vexcal and other glaives did well when I used them, but forced other teammates to pick up the slack when dealing with champions. Buried Bloodline is still, of course, one of the better ways you can pick up an easy ranged weaken with decent damage. Arc Conductor Ergo fared pretty well, especially when on Prismatic, but heavy attacking into finisher for an invisible Tesla coil on weakened blinded enemies was pretty fun. Whisperer Darcy could be your boss damage while your other weapons maintain a more close distance while fighting. Sleeper wouldn't be a bad pick either. Be aware that if you swap to Prismatic, you won't go invisible, so you'll need to account for enemies further away shooting you after the finisher. So methods of getting damage reduction or tools to assist in this are nice. It's hard to justify a swap off Song of Flame, but Frost Armor or Woven Mail would be really helpful alongside Amplified. If you want to go completely free to play, you could, I guess, remove Felwinters and run Nezarec Sin or Aeon Soul. I don't think this is nearly as fun, and everything will shoot you after you get out of finisher and Viz, rather than be blinded. That's about it. Please experiment. The build is super flexible but reliant on what weapons you choose. Thanks for watching. The next build will be something with prismatic or stasis, if I can get it working. If you have any requests for restrictions, please let me know in the comments. I appreciate the outpouring of support, and it really makes me happy to see people using the build or hear people enjoying them. So, thank you. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing for more content. Have a good one.